Well, as it turns out, two wrongs really don't make a right. But two rights make an airplane. And who loves airplanes? Yes. I mean, maybe right now we all don't want to fly on airplanes. Maybe some of us are terrified of them, but they are pretty cool. So two wrongs don't make a right, but two rights make an airplane. We've got an image up here of the Wright brothers, the first powered airplane. And for these two messages, last week and this week, this phrase, this wisdom, two wrongs don't make a right, but two rights make an airplane, is our anchor point to help us think about how we will enter into controversial topics. We're in a series called Controversial Conversations. We're laying the foundation, the groundwork for that now. And starting next week, we're going to be going into particular controversial topics. Are you scared? I am, so be scared with me. It'll be great. The Wright brothers, so if you remember last week, we said there are 4 reasons that they were able to win a race. The race was who could create the first self-powered airplane. And there were big companies and people who had a lot more resources and a lot more experience competing with them to win the race, and they won. There are 4 things that enabled them to win that race. We said, number 1, truth enabled them to win that race. That is the pursuit of truth. They weren't just going after what was their own opinion. They were trying to figure out in a really open way what really works. What's the truth about airplanes, about can people fly, and what do we have to do to make that happen? In some other companies, people were caught up in their own opinions. They didn't want to give up their opinion, and so they couldn't change what they were doing. So we said truth, number 1. Number 2, humility. We talked about that last week. So when you encounter something that you tried, you worked really hard on, it fails, the Wright brothers were humble enough to scrap the whole thing and start over from scratch. And that's something that's sometimes very hard to do. So humility, they had that. We said number 3, relationship. These guys were a team. They were brothers, and they were brothers who were actually friends with each other, best friends of each other. And so when, they had a disagreement about, should the wing go this way or should the wing go that way, they didn't split up over it. They didn't fight over it. Maybe they debated it, but they stayed together as a team. Relationship, very important. And number 4, faith. We talked about that last week as well. The Wright brothers had astonishing faith. In their case, for no particularly good reason. I don't know why. They had faith that they could win this race. We talked about last week, would you have the faith to think you could make a better app than Google, right? That's the kind of thing that they did. They thought they could, just the two of them, take on the big boys, the big corporations, and they thought they could win the race. That's amazing. So they had faith. And we talked about how those 4 things, we're going to see, we saw last week, we talked about humility and we talked about faith. We're going to see today truth and relationship is where we're going today. We're going to see how the Bible shows us that those are 4 key elements that we need. We need to live out, walk in the way that Jesus did as we enter into controversial topics. You see, those of us who have given our lives to Jesus, we have an opportunity to enter into some of these super controversial areas in a way that actually brings life and health and peace. It's not going to solve every problem immediately, but it's going to make the potential there to move forward, to help people grow instead of just causing a fight that spirals downward out of control. We have that ability, that potential, because we've given our lives to Jesus. He has paid the price for our sins on the cross. And we are now, those of us who have chosen to give our lives to Him, are in a relationship with God. We talked about last week, Jesus' faith. This was our key story. Let's put up that picture. This was our key story, Jesus before Pontius Pilate. We're going to be using this story again today. Jesus was on trial for His life, and He seemed to have no need to defend Himself. No need to win the arguments. In fact, most of the time He was silent. How could He have had no need to win when His very life was on the line? Because He trusted His Father in heaven. It's because of His faith. He knew that no matter what these people did, He was going to be just fine. In fact, better than fine. Because God's in control, not human beings. And so our faith, just like that, can enable us to be free from the need to win and fight in an argument and actually enable us to help other people. So let's remember our points, two of our points from last week about faith and humility. One was this: faith makes conversation possible. It doesn't mean that without faith you can never have a conversation. That's not true. But our faith enables us to enter into conversations instead of arguments. It is a powerful tool if we really trust God. Second point to remind us of from last week. These are not the points for your notes for this week. If you're here on site, you can write these down, but they're not actually listed to fill in the blanks. In humility, value others above yourselves. And we saw Jesus doing that, even in a situation where the people that he was up against were very, very wrong. They were doing the wrong thing. They were going to execute an innocent man in a horrific way, and they were doing it for the wrong reasons. They were doing it because they were jealous of his power. They were jealous of his popularity. They were wrong in every way. Yet, in humility, he didn't put his own life, his own needs ahead of theirs. He sought for ways to help them. And we saw that in his conversation with the Roman governor, a man named Pontius Pilate. This was the first person. Jesus had been silent the whole time. He loved these people, but there was no way his arguing with them was going to help them. But when he encountered Pontius Pilate, he found a man who had some openness to pursuing the truth, not just his own opinion. And immediately Jesus tries to help him. Doesn't try to defend himself or get himself out of things. He tries to help the governor who's about to execute him. In humility, value others above yourselves. Those are two keys. We're going to come back to those and remember those as we go through the topics we'll be addressing over the next weeks. Now, let's jump into today. So today, we'll talk about the other two pieces. We'll talk about truth and relationship. All right, so let's go into truth first. Foundation of truth is the title of today's message. So back to that story, Pontius Pilate and Jesus. You remember what was going on here at this moment? Here's an image. Pontius Pilate is this guy right here. I didn't explain this last week, but this guy in the toga, you probably figured it out. That's the Roman governor. And this is Jesus here. He's already begun, in the picture anyway, he's begun to be tortured. He's got the crown of thorns on his head. Pontius Pilate is addressing a huge crowd in the city, and that crowd is threatening to riot. The Jewish leaders wanted Jesus dead. And so, without any justification, without any evidence, they had riled up the crowd to cheer and demand Jesus be executed. This guy's got to be executed. Pontius Pilate, the governor, doesn't want to execute him. Number one, he doesn't understand even why this guy's on trial. They are putting him to death because he's the Messiah. I don't even know what that is, says Pontius Pilate. I'm not a Jew. What has he done that's wrong? He's innocent. We'll see him say that as we read through the dialogue again today. So he doesn't want to kill Jesus. He's also had a letter from his wife saying, I had a dream. This guy's a good guy. He's innocent. Don't execute him. But Pontius Pilate is under immense pressure. Pontius Pilate has been sent to the province of Judea, and his superiors, the Roman emperor, has given him a mission. The mission is this: hey, those people in Judea, those religious people, they are really hard to control. But you need to go and do whatever you need to do so that they don't riot or cause a rebellion. And so Pontius Pilate is looking out at this crowd that's about to riot if he doesn't execute Jesus, something that he knows to be wrong. But his life, as well as Jesus' life, is on the line. Because if he allows that crowd to riot, and word gets back to the Roman emperor that he did not do what he was asked to do, to keep that population from rioting, he could be executed or forced to commit suicide. This is how the Roman Empire worked. So Pontius Pilate is in distress, and in that moment, he comes back from the crowd. He's been trying to convince them, let's not kill this innocent guy. And like often happens, they're not listening to him at all. They're just yelling at him, crucify. Pilate comes back in and he has this conversation with Jesus. Let's read it again as we did last week. Pilate went back inside the palace, and he summoned Jesus and he asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" So come on, Jesus, tell me, have you actually committed a rebellion? Is that what you're trying to do here? Is there any basis for this charge? Jesus says, "Is that your own idea? Or did others talk to you about me?" Now, I think what Jesus is saying here is when Pilate asks him a question, and sounds like he really wants to know the answer, not just convict Jesus, Jesus all of a sudden wakes up. He lights up. Somebody here wants to know the truth. Does this guy actually want to know the truth? Where did you hear that? Why are you asking me this question, Governor? Pilate says, "Am I a Jew? It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" So Pilate basically replies and he says, "I have no idea what's going on here. Just tell me what you've done. Why are they so mad at you? Help me, Jesus. Help me to get you out of this." Jesus then begins to speak truth to Pilate because he thinks Pilate is actually listening. "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews, but now my kingdom is from another place." What is he saying? Okay, Governor, I am a king, but not the kind of king that you think I am. There's no danger here that I'm going to lead an army and have a political rebellion. In fact, this had already been a temptation for Jesus earlier in his ministry. There were moments when crowds of thousands, tens of thousands, were demanding that he claim to be the king, and they would join him and be his army, and they'd go fight people. Jesus said, "No way." In fact, you know what he did? He ran away from them when they did that. "No way, that's not how this is going down. My kingdom," he says, "is from another place." Next. So Pilate looks at him, he says, "You are a king then." Oh, he says, "Okay, you said it, you're a king. I caught you." Jesus answered, "You're right in saying that I'm a king, Governor. I am a king of sorts, not the kind you think. In fact, for this reason I was born. I was born to become the king. And I came into the world to testify to the truth." And then Jesus gives this astonishing line of teaching to Pilate. He says this, "Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Go to the next slide. We'll come back to that. Pilate answers with another astonishingly deep line. Pilate says this, "What is truth?" And then Pilate leaves the conversation. He goes back out to the crowds and he says, "I find no basis for a charge against him. We should let him go." But within a couple of hours, Pontius Pilate will have ordered the crucifixion of the Son of God. Now, you remember we talked about last week as well, what happens after this? Within 4 years, it is very, very likely that two things have happened. Number one, Pontius Pilate is dead within 4 years. And number two, before he dies, he very likely gave his life to Jesus and became a Christian. These words of Jesus stuck with him. That's what Jesus' words do. If you're genuinely not sure if Jesus is the Son of God, you want to find out, just go read and really dig into some of his teaching and then wait. Think about it over time, pray, and watch what his teaching does in your life. It has power like nothing else the world has ever known. And that power can be demonstrated in your life. It was demonstrated in Pontius Pilate's life. What must it have been like for him to give his life to Jesus and become the follower of the man whose execution he ordered? I can't even imagine. Let's go back. We'll back up to this verse, Jesus' response to Pontius Pilate, and we can say a couple of things about truth and about pursuing the truth. I said this was a remarkable statement, that Jesus says to Pontius Pilate, "Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." One of the things that very clearly implies is that there are people in the world who are not on the side of truth. What would it mean to not be on the side of truth? I think it means this. It means that they don't want to know the truth. There are people in the world, Jesus is saying, who are not really seeking the truth. What are they seeking then? Their own opinion, their own side to an argument. There are people in the world who have chosen to believe certain things, regardless of evidence, and will interpret whatever evidence comes as supporting their claim. In fact, these people are very, very common. In fact, there's a bunch of us sitting in this room. Often this is how we think. Often this is how I think. We interpret things. We don't want to really find out the truth because sometimes the truth means that we're wrong. And that's not fun. Or sometimes the truth means that one side of an argument that I have allied myself with is the wrong side. And that's not something that I like to discover. What Jesus is saying here, so this is the first point you can write down in your notes. I'm going to put it in a different way. What Jesus is saying here, there are people who are not on the side of truth. Jesus is clearly saying that we must seek the truth. Don't just try to be right, try to find the truth. He is also saying, implying very much so, and he says this other places, that if you really seek the truth, eventually you will find out that it's him. Everyone who really is on the side of truth, if you have genuine questions about whether Jesus, I don't think Jesus is the one. I mean, this was a place where I was at in my life at one point. I was convinced, I thought I was absolutely right, that Jesus was not the way, that he was just a man who had lived a long time ago that didn't really matter very much, and that Christians had made up a bunch of stuff about him. I was convinced that that was the truth. Turns out I was wrong. What got me there is that more than I wanted to be right, I wanted to find out what was really true. And eventually, by pursuing that path, I was shown, I didn't just find it on my own, but was shown by God himself that this is true. Everyone who seeks truth enough and keeps going and doesn't just want to be right will eventually find that the truth is Jesus Christ. This is powerful. But we've all had that experience of thinking that we are absolutely right about something, and then later finding out we were totally wrong. Have you had that experience? Yeah, if you haven't, then you're lying. Okay, so thinking that you're absolutely right about something and later finding out you were totally wrong. Sometimes it has to do with things that are very important, and sometimes it has to do with things that are kind of silly. And it's easier to talk about the silly things. So here's my example, okay? When I was a kid, growing up, I heard the word volleyball. I heard people say the word volleyball. Only when I heard them say it, I didn't hear volleyball, I heard volleyball. And so I just decided, that's what I heard, and so I decided the word, I don't know how old I was, probably a little kid, I decided the word was volleyball, and that's what I said. I said, whenever I referred to it, I referred to volleyball, and people don't correct you because they hear what they want to hear. They hear the V, even though I'm saying the B. And I hear the B, even though they're saying the V. And this went on for a long time. I was convinced the word was volleyball, and I must have never seen it written down. I don't know how, or maybe when I saw it written down, I just didn't believe it, or I just saw what I wanted to see. So one day, I'm in high school, and I hear somebody pronounce the word volleyball with a very pronounced V. And I started laughing, and I turned to my friend, and I'm like, dude, he just said volleyball. That's hilarious. And my friend looks at me like I'm out of my mind and says, it is volleyball. What are you talking about? And I said, no, it is not. And for the next hour, my friends tried to convince me that the word was actually volleyball, and I would not be convinced. It didn't matter that there were 5 of them and 1 of me. I said, no way, it is volleyball. You guys are out of your minds. They brought the word written on paper to me and said, look, here's the volleyball team from our school. I still didn't believe it. I said, that must be a typo. Finally, I was convinced, but for a full hour, for a full hour, I chose to interpret all evidence as supporting my position because I didn't want to believe that I'd been saying something as embarrassing as volleyball my whole life. I didn't want to be wrong. And so I refused to really look at any of the evidence for the other side of the argument. And this is what human beings do all the time. And this is Jesus' question, are you really on the side of truth? It's his question when it comes to himself and God and all of life. It's his question to us when it comes to any particular controversy. Do you really want to seek the truth, or do you just want to bolster your own position? Do you just seek your own opinion and to be right? This is, in fact, absolutely essential. The fact that we seek truth, not just our own opinion, is essential for our entire civilization. It is the basis of all science and every advance the human race has ever had. Think about those Wright brothers again for a minute. They had a moment in their development of that airplane where it seemed like things were not going to work out. They had tried a bunch of times. They had tried, I think, for over a year at that point, and all their experiments had failed. In fact, there was another guy near them, another guy working for a company near them, who had tried a bunch of times too and failed, and he quit because he decided, well, there's just no way to ever figure this out. And the Wright brothers, even though they were discouraged and it seemed like it was almost impossible to find the way to fly, they went back to their hometown, and what they did was they built a wind tunnel, and they decided we're just going to do experiment after experiment until we find the right shape for the wing. And they did hundreds of experiments, failure after failure. And this is very common for people who have invented great things. You have to try again and again and again to find it, to find the right answer, and finally you find it, but most of your attempts will fail. Now, the very basis of that method, the very basis of it is that we are pursuing truth, not just my own opinion. If someone just decides, it's very easy to look at any situation in the world and just think, well, I have an idea about how that might work, and my idea is probably right because it's mine. You know, this is what human beings did for thousands of years. I have an idea about the earth. It's flat because look at it. It's flat. You can see it's obvious, right? I have an idea about the sun. It goes around the earth. You can see that, right? It's obvious. But unless we are very committed to the truth, there are often things that appear obvious to us that turn out to be wrong. And unless we are fully committed to the truth, not just our own opinion, we cannot learn and grow. It's the basis of our whole civilization and all the advances that human beings have had. All right, let's move forward. We're talking about truth. So the point on truth is don't try to be right. Try to find the truth. Now, let's move into talking about relationship. And for this, we're going to read from Romans chapter 12. I've given you guys a couple of times recently, I've given you different parts of the Bible that are great snapshots, summaries of what is God looking for from human beings. Okay, so we give our lives to Jesus, we're forgiven of our sins, we enter into a new life, now what? What does God want from me? What kind of people does he want us to become? And I gave you the fruit of the Spirit a couple of weeks ago, which is a great snapshot, summary of what God is looking for from human beings. Here is another place in the Bible that is an amazing summary of what God is looking for. Romans chapter 12, verses 9 to 21. And let's read this, and then we'll draw a couple of conclusions about controversial conversations from it. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need and practice hospitality. As we're reading this, think about those controversial conversations. Think about a time when you've been in an argument with somebody who you knew was wrong. Keep reading with me. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position, or even people you think are not very smart. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Don't take revenge, my friends. Leave room for God's wrath. Justice, making people get what they deserve, not my job, God's job. For it is written, "It is mine to avenge. I will repay," says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. And then Paul wraps it all up with this: do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Overcome evil with good. All right. We could teach an entire series of messages just from these verses. So we can't go super deep into each piece today. But looking at that teaching as a whole, the kind of person that it paints a picture of, that's what Jesus was like. That's what he wants us to become like as we follow him. Looking at that kind of person, now think about controversial topics. Think about those times when you disagree with someone, you've really thought about an issue, you've done what we said at the start, you've pursued the truth, you've thought about all sides of it, you have, to the best of your ability, figured out this is the right way to go on this issue, it's clear, and this other person thinks you're totally wrong. They think something exactly the opposite of you, and they're super vocal about it. Maybe they're even yelling at you about it. Maybe they're making fun of you about it. You can see so clearly, you are absolutely certain that they're wrong. If you are to become this kind of person, how should you treat them? Should you, for example, think of all the best arguments you can and just hammer them? Should you slander them and make fun of them until they go home crying to their mama? Should you cut off all relationship with them and kick them out of your circles because they have a different opinion than you or they've come to a different conclusion? Should you hate them? The answer is obviously not. Very clearly, a person who is becoming like this will tolerate people who are wrong. People who it's obvious to me they are wrong about something, I will tolerate them. I will bear with them. In fact, I might even be able to still be friends with them, even though we think in totally different ways. Let's put up that picture. This was a great picture I saw on Facebook that just made me think, yes, this is a huge part of what the Bible is saying. Can you read that? Let's zoom in a little closer. Boom. We can disagree and still be friends. Now, that doesn't mean you will always be friends with someone who disagrees with you. If someone disagrees with you about a subject and they are trying to attack you over it, it's pretty hard to be friends with them. You might have to set some boundaries in that situation. The teaching of Jesus is not just let anyone do anything to you. That's not his teaching. But his teaching is that we must love those other people. Remember, as far as it depends on me, I live at peace with them. Whatever they do to me, I don't return evil for it, no matter what. I do things because I'm laying myself down. In humility, I'm putting their needs above mine. I do anything I can to help them. Sometimes there's nothing I can do to help them. But anything that I can do to help them, I do it. In fact, we could sum up Jesus' teaching. It's not just that we tolerate people who are wrong. We could sum up his teaching in this area by saying this. This is the next point for your notes. Build relationship with people who are wrong. We often hear that Jesus' teaching is to love your enemy. Love your enemy, but that's an easy teaching until we recognize who our enemy actually is. Our enemy is the people that we have negative feelings toward, the people that we think they are way off base, they are doing completely the wrong thing. How could they ever even think what they think, much less do the things that they do? That's my enemy. That's who Jesus is calling me to build a relationship with. That is a stunning teaching from Jesus. We can disagree and still be friends. Now, why is this so important? The last thing we're going to talk about is living out the truth that we already have. Let's put that point up, and this is the last point for your notes. You can write it down, and then we will explain. Let me explain what I mean by this. The last point for today is live out the truth that you already know. Picture again Pontius Pilate in that moment where he's with Jesus. You remember he has this statement. He says back to Jesus, "What is truth?" He actually gives up on the whole idea of truth in that moment because he's tempted to do something wrong and he wants to justify it. Let me show you what I mean. In that moment, Pontius Pilate, the world is confusing, right? How many of you would agree that life and the world and the universe are very complicated and confusing? It's often very difficult to tell what's right and what's wrong in a particular situation. Some things are black and white. We'll see that in a minute. But often it's very difficult to tell what's right and wrong. If you disagree with that, you're either very young, number one, you're maybe a teenager, or if you disagree with that, you think everything is black and white, you've probably decided to just believe your own opinion or believe one side of an argument and only listen to that. If you genuinely pursue truth in any area, it becomes very complicated and difficult to figure out very fast. And just like some of the people who were competing with the Wright brothers, they found it very complicated to figure out, how do I make an airplane fly? Some of them gave up. There's no solution. I give up. It can never be found. Just like that, Pontius Pilate, in that moment, he's tempted to give up on the truth. For a moment, Jesus has opened his mind. Maybe this guy really is the truth. Maybe he knows something. But Pontius Pilate, remember, is tempted to do something that he knows to be wrong. And so one of the ways that we can get away in our own minds with doing something that we know to be wrong is we can just say, well, it's impossible to figure it out. Pontius Pilate is tempted to crucify Jesus because if he doesn't, his city is going to riot and his own life is going to be on the line. He's tempted to do something that he knows deep down to be wrong. So he says there is no truth. The truth can never be found. Life is so confusing and complicated. There's a million different claims to the truth. The emperor claims to be a god. All the other gods claim to be a god. The Jews claim there's a different God. The Romans think you should live this way. The Jews think you should live this way. They all fight with each other all the time. Not only can we never find the truth, there is even no truth. It doesn't exist. If the truth doesn't exist, here's why that's so dangerous. If the truth doesn't exist, you can justify anything. If there's no such thing as truth, then nothing I do is wrong. How could you ever say it's wrong if there's no truth? And so very often, either explicitly we say it out loud like Pontius Pilate did, or internally we give up trying to find the truth in a situation. We say it can't be found so that we can justify something that we want to do that's wrong. So, our last point is to live out the truth we already know. There are situations in life that are very complicated and maybe almost impossible to figure out what's right in this situation, in the particulars of it. But there are things that are very clear in this life as well. Just like Pontius Pilate couldn't figure out how to deal with the Jews and deal with Jesus, it was so complicated, but he knew that it was wrong to execute Jesus. There are things in this life that are very clear. Let's put up John chapter 8, and let me show you a pattern that Jesus himself gives us. This is a teaching that Jesus gave to those who had decided to follow him. To the Jews who had believed in him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples." Pause there. If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. What is he saying? First of all, if you've heard some truth from Jesus, you've heard him say some things that are good, start doing them. It doesn't matter that you don't know everything. It doesn't matter that there's parts of life that are so confusing you can never figure it out. You've heard some things that are true, like love your enemy, like ask for forgiveness, bless those who curse you. You've heard some things that are true. They might be really hard to do, but you know they're true, so just start doing it. If you do that, you're going to really be his disciple. What's a disciple? Someone who's learning from him. So even though we don't know all the truth, some things are really complicated, if we start following Jesus in the things we already know for sure, he will show us more truth. He's going to continue to teach us in more difficult areas. Next. So he says, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. And then he says, then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So Jesus here shows us that even though life is extremely complicated and we can never figure it all out, that we cannot use that as an excuse to give up on all truth and just justify anything we want to do. All right, let's put this on the ground, right? This is all really easy to talk about until it comes to specific arguments that we have. Let's bring up the slide of the topics we're going to start covering. This is the last week that we're going to do foundations of the truth. And starting next week, here's the stuff that we're going to talk about in church. I am convinced that God has asked us to do this, but I'm also really scared to do it, so pray for me. All right? Next week, we're going to talk about racism and how we can think biblically about it. It's going to be a conversation. We're going to talk about women and men. Women's roles, men's roles, how they relate together. Are men and women just the same? Are they different? We're going to talk about abortion. We're going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about LGBTQ+. I expect that this will probably be the most tense part of this series of messages. And finally, we're going to talk about COVID-19 and how we respond to it. I'm not going to try to tell you how to think on all these things. What we're going to do is walk together through this, look at the Bible, and we're actually going to try to listen to both sides of the argument, even if it seems clear that the Bible leans heavily one way. We're going to try to listen to both sides. Now, I said just a minute ago, we have to live out the truth that we already have. Live out the truth that we already know. What would that mean in these situations? Racism. Let's take one example. Next week, we're going to talk about racism. This is a very tricky and complicated subject. Would you agree? It's very complicated. There are questions that I don't think anyone has the answer to. Is it true that there are people in the world who think they're not racist, but they really are? That's a complex question. Is it true that there are people who really are not racist at all, but they live in a system that was developed inside by racists, and because they live in that system, they still act in racist ways, even though they don't see it? That is an extremely difficult, complicated question. I'm not going to be able to arrive at one answer to that question. We're going to try to talk about it biblically. That's an extremely complicated question. But does that question, we can't find an answer to it, maybe. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. Some of you we might feel like we do find an answer to it. But that does, whether we can or not, does not give us an excuse to do nothing. Because there are some things in the subject of racism that are very clear that we should do. Jesus says, love your neighbor and love your enemy, right? So it's very clear that one good thing I could do is just go and meet people who are very different from me and build relationships with them, right? It's pretty obvious that that's something that Jesus would want me to do. And so I need to start doing it, even though I can't figure everything about racism out. I can start living the things that I know to be true. In Romans chapter 12, one of the things that Paul said was, be careful to do what is right in the sight of everyone. At first I thought, do what everyone thinks is right? No. That's not what he says. Do the things that are obviously right to everyone. There are certain things that no one or virtually no one would disagree with, right? If we go and help people who are in need, we reach out, we try to make peace in situations. These are things that are right in the sight of everyone. We do those things. And as we do them, we will be following Jesus, and he will lead us into more and more truth. That's a huge pattern here. So what we need to do is, as we go into this controversial conversations, we go into the deep, the hard topics on this subject. Please be praying about it. And please keep these principles in mind. We must be humble as we go into it. We must trust in God and not feel a need to win the argument, not feel the need to win it. We must pursue the truth, not just our own opinion. We must try to the best of our ability to figure out what's true in these subjects. We must try to build relationship with people who we think are obviously wrong. Because if we have a relationship, that's totally different. It's totally different to talk about these things in the abstract than it is to go and talk with a person who you disagree with. It's a totally different thing. Half the problems just disappear. And finally, we must live out the truth that we already know. Whatever we can figure out for sure, we got to act on it and put it into practice. And as we take that step of faith, God will lead us to more and more truth. Let's pray now. We'll continue in worship. Our God in heaven, we thank you so